You're listening to the Slavic Literature Pod, your shelf help guide to all things Slavic. I'm Cameron Lalana.
And I'm Matt Gerasimovich.
And today we're covering Part 1, Chapter 71 of Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate, the very final part of Part 1. Wild.
Congratulations if you made it this far. That's a big accomplishment.
That is a big accomplishment. So thank you for being with us through this part. Sorry that we're ending this in the camps, not a super upper ending. But, I don't see how else we could have ended this part.
Yeah, well, I didn't write it, so I don't know. Don't look at me.
We just made you read it, so it's not really... anything that happens is not our fault.
I'm just the guy with the podcast and the microphone.
We're just the people setting the agenda for what you're reading. If you're reading along with us. But anywho, we're continuing forward with time in the camps, moving on a little bit from Yershov's plan to rise up against the fascist forces, with the next day General Goods coming over to Mostovskoye and says, hey, so I see you've been talking to Yershov, and I think, Soviet-wise speaking, maybe not the best decision. And Mostovskoye says, no, he's got this great plan. And then Goods goes, ha, no, that's what we're going to do. Don't really trust him. He's not a good element. Go over and talk to Osipov. He'll tell you some more. Also, here are the appropriate people who you should be listening to for good Soviet politics in the camp. And Mostovskoye says, all right, yeah, sounds good. Cool. He does. He goes and learns more. And then after a brief search of the cabin, some time passes and Mostovskoye and 6 others are taken away by SS guards, which you don't love to see. You don't love when that happens. No. And that is where Part 1 ends.
Yeah, you finally probably get to the end of Part 1. You're like, great, I can set it down, take a little bit of a break. And then Grossman reminds you that he can write cliffhangers.
Yeah, and
if you dare forget, he reminds you.
Yeah. If you think he will end this on, if you think he won't end this on something incredibly sad, well, he will. It can and will get worse.
Yeah. So that's fun.
So,
that's
indeed. Is there anywhere in particular that you wanted to start with this one?
I don't have a ton on this chapter, to be honest, but I like the sort of penultimate paragraph that slowly the feeling that had tortured Mostovskoye, the sense of life's impossible complexity, was melting away. Once again, as in his youth, the world seemed clear and simple, neatly divided into friends and enemies. And this is an interesting point here. I don't know that it's necessarily good. I would say, I think that in some ways it maybe it is for him. I don't know, but just this sort of question of complexity. I think Grossman, similar to Tolstoy, when people kind of start to find something and align with something that really kind of makes them feel like, that makes a lot of sense. Life isn't, when they start to get involved with certain things, say like religion for Tolstoy, right, it kind of comes crumbling down. And we'll see as this goes on whether Mostovskoye's worldview, has he achieved some divine simplicity, or has he fallen victim to some sort of ideological way of thinking that is merely shielding him from the world in an attempt to kind of make life, I don't want to say easy because it's not an easy situation he's in, but to sort of shield, to kind of as a self-protective mechanism,
Coming into this, I'll lay my cards on the table and say that I think I come away from this the latter interpretation. As I was reading this chapter, I was thinking a lot about the point you've been making over the last few episodes on unity and division, and how the sort of agreements among these groups prevent themselves from really coming to really understanding each other, even though they all come from a common background. They all speak a common language, and they have a common homeland. They are unable to really understand what the others are speaking because the other is not the right kind of Soviet, or is a suspicious element, or is a Menshevik, or is a very suspicious Tolstoyan. And in this way that people with so many commonalities can't really come to an agreement and can't find unity, we find much of the tragedy of the 20th century.
Whoa.
But bringing it back, we haven't fully integrated that one in a little while. we have this sort of moment where you do have an attempt at that with Yershov's plan, which isn't dependent on whether or not you're a good Soviet citizen. And Mostovskoy gets really hyped for it and is like, well, hyped enough, as hyped as an old man in a prison camp can be. So when Goods approaches him, and Goods says, look, he's not a real good Soviet element, so he really shouldn't be involved in this pushback against the Nazi forces. And Mostovskoy remarks to him, what a strange conversation this is. Sometimes I begin to think there's nothing left of people except political vigilance. Who'd have thought we end up like this? Which kind of get right. It's more important for him to be a correct element than for him to be an intelligent person fighting against the Nazi forces. And Mostovskoy is in this edge of understanding because he is a good Bolshevik, and that's why everyone respects him. But he is also has an open enough mind to hang out with Ikonnikov, with Chernetsov, with Yershov. But in being brought back in with Goods, with Osipov, we begin to understand the survival instinct Mostovskoy has, which has gotten him to this point where he has sort of been the stepson of the age, right? He's been a Bolshevik at a time. And in the same way that being sent to the camp stripped Abarchuk of his ability to judge, he lost his Soviet rightness. Mostovskoy has been missing it, but being brought back into the fold so deeply by Goods and Osipov seems to put him in that same situation we leave Abarchuk in, where he has this right to judge back again. And we come back to that point that you've said, where he, this whole book, he's been expressing that his friends no longer seem like friends, and really it seems like he gets along with his enemies better, seemingly. But being brought back into the fold, finally, again, he regains that sense of unity and perspective, which ironically means that he likely or would have to start moving away from the unity he'd been building with Chernetsov, with Ikonnikov, and so on and such forth, meaning that you fall into that ironic unity, necessarily meaning that you have to cut yourself off from others.
Yeah, no, that's a great way of putting it. I agree. I don't think this book marches towards any sort of simplicity whatsoever. So, to me, when you see a character sort of it's it's a tricky balance, right? Because there are characters that, like Ikonnikov, right, who can sort of in some ways he sees through some of this complexity and say, no, this is wrong and right. And that way you can see some simplicity. But generally speaking, most of the characters, if they have a simple worldview, it does kind of mean that they're an idiot. That does tend to be what it means. Right. It means that they really don't have an understanding of what's going on, and actually quite how complex this situation is overall. And so I think that you're right. I think that this is troubling, a troubling note to end on. In some ways, perhaps on some plane, as just as troubling as him being taken away for interrogation.
Yeah, right.
So you get two back-to-back troubling aspects to end on. If you were only concerned about one, now you have two. So enjoy.
Yeah. Unexpectedly, troubles seem to only multiply when you are in a Nazi prison camp.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah.
But that's all I had for today.
That's perfect. That's the question I was about to ask you. So in that case, I think you'll hear from us again soon as we cover part 2 of Vasily Grossman's life and fate.